Often we want to add calculations to our queries to work out results. We also want to create situations where we can combine information in separate fields and join them into one field. One of the queries we made earlier was a query called QRY Student in Class, and I'd like to right-click this query and choose Design View to return to the design of this query. What we have in the grid that occupies the bottom half of the screen is the first field, First Name, and I'd like to make a modification to First Name. First of all, I'll stretch the width of this column so you can see more clearly, and I'll click in front of First Name. I want to call this new field or this new column full name, so I'll give it the alias full name. So you can call it anything and then a colon. And then what you do is you refer to other fields in square brackets. So I'm going to go square bracket last name because I want to refer to the field last name. And it must be spelled exactly as it is. After the last name, I'd like to see a comma and a space, and this is considered text. So I have to say ampersand, which is by holding the Shift key and hitting the 7 key, ampersand, double quote, comma, space, double quote. Any text such as a space or a comma and a space must be enclosed within double quotes, and the ampersand means and. So I'm asking for the last name and a comma and a space and the field first name. So I must put square brackets around first name. And then I'll press enter. So I've created a calculation called last name and a comma and a space and first name. I'd now like to get rid of last name, so I'll just put my mouse above this column until I get a little black down arrow, and I'll click and press the delete key on my keyboard. So instead of having a separate first name and a separate last name, I've now asked for a column called full name. Now I could actually just check what this looks like so far before I continue, and that's by hitting the View button to the far left of the ribbon. When I hit the View button, I can see I now have a column called full name, and it's the last name, a comma, a space, and the first name. If I then hit the View button again to the far left of the ribbon, I can return to the design view of this query. In addition to seeing the cost field, I'd like to see a calculation that works out the GST. So I'm going to click in this blank field to the right of cost. I'll call this column GST, colon, and then I'll refer to the field cost in square brackets. Square bracket, cost, close square bracket. And I want to multiply the cost by 15%. So I'm going to go star, which is times 0.15. Because it doesn't actually allow us to say star or times 15%. We have to put the decimal equivalent. When I press enter, there's my formula there, and if I hit the View button to the far left of my ribbon, I can view the query as it is to date, and here's my new column called GST, and it's calculated 15% of the cost, which is $15. But I actually would like to format this calculation so it shows this amount as currency in a dollars format. So I'll hit the View button to the far left of my ribbon, and I'll click on the GST formula, and then I'll use my property sheet to format this formula. Now if your property sheet is not showing, and I'll just close mine so I'm in that situation, what you can do up here in the ribbon is click the property sheet button, and that will bring that up. So while I'm sitting on this function, I'll go to the format property, and I'll hit the drop down, and I'll choose currency. And I'll choose decimal places, and I'll set the decimal places property to 2. When I then view my query by hitting the View button to the far left of the ribbon, I can now see that I've got my GST calculation showing as currency with 2 decimal places. I'd now like to add another calculation to the right of GST, which adds the cost to the GST and gives me the total cost. So I'll go back to the design of my query, and I'll click in the column to the right of GST. I want to call this column total cost, and then a colon. I'll refer to the cost field in square brackets, and I'll add with a plus the GST field in square brackets. I'll just move over so you can see more clearly, and here's my formula. Total cost, which is the cost field, plus the GST field. Now I'll click on total costs, and using my property sheet I'll format it to currency and set the decimal places. Well, I actually don't need to set the decimal places because it's picked up that the earlier two have 2 decimal places, so this will naturally have 2 decimal places. If I then view my query result by hitting the view button to the far left of my ribbon, I can see I have total cost, which is the addition of these 2 values showing as currency in 2 decimal places. Having added calculations to this query, I'd actually like to save this query using the Save button on my Quick Access toolbar, and I'd like to close this query, so I'll just hit the Close button. I'd now like to add some calculation to this query called QRY Student Assignment Result, so I'll right-click this particular query and go into Design View. Again, I don't want to see a separate first name and last name, so I'm just going to modify first name by changing it to full name, colon, and I want to see the first name in square brackets, ampersand, and I'd like a space, so double quote, space, double quote, ampersand, and then a reference to the field last name in square brackets. And there's my formula there. Full name is the name of the column. It'll be the first name and a space and the last name, which means I no longer need this field last name, so I'll just put my mouse above last name until I get this little black down arrow, and I'll click and I'll press the delete key on my keyboard. If I hit the view button to the far left of my ribbon, I can view my query result so far and see if my full name calculation is working. And here it is here. I have a column called full name, which is simply the first name, a space, and the last name. I'd now like to add another calculation to work out the student's grade. So I'm going to go back to the design view of the query, and I'm going to click in the field to the right of percent of grade. I'd like to create a column called student grade, and a colon. I'll refer to the field score in square brackets. So square bracket, score, square bracket, close square bracket, multiplied by, so that's the asterisk or the star, square bracket, percent of grade. And as mentioned earlier, you must refer to fields exactly how they are spelt. I'll just widen this so you can see. So you can see the student grade is the score field multiplied by the percent of grade field. What I'd like to do now is just check that it is looking correct, so I'll hit my view button to the far left of my ribbon, and here are my grades here. What I'd also like to do is show the full name in capitals. So I'm going to go back to the design of my query. I'm going to click on full name, and using my property sheet, and particularly the format property, I'll click and I'll type a greater than. And this is the same as in the stage 1 material. In the stage 1 material, we looked at the fact that a greater than on a text field means format to uppercase, and a less than on a text field means format to lowercase. So I'll just view my query and check that's working, hitting the view button to the far left of my ribbon, and here I can see my full names are in capitals because I formatted them with a greater than sign. If I go back to the design of the query, I'd also like to format the student grade. So I'll click on student grade, and I'd like to format it to fixed and fix it to 2 decimal places. So decimal places, I'll set the property to 2. If I now view my query, hitting the view button to the far left of the ribbon, I can see I've formatted the student grade to fixed to 2 decimal places. I'd now like to save this query, so I hit the Save button on my Quick Access toolbar, and I'll close this query. And we've added calculations to both the select queries that we had in our navigation pane.